try this one. Okay, so I'll try recording as well. But yeah, thanks for everyone for joining us today. Welcome to Wyndham City Council's online sessions. This is a Wormlovers session. I'm sorry, just to introduce myself. I'm Simon Crawford from Wyndham City Council. I'm a Waste and Litter Education Officer in the Green Living team in our Climate Futures Office. We've got Gia and Gail joining us today from Wormlovers. Hi guys. This is all part of the My Smart Garden event that Wyndham City Council are running at the moment. So there's lots of events going on. Please, check out the calendar. I'm assuming you have already, the fact that you've come along today, but check out the other events that are going on. Just a bit about Wormlovers, if you don't already know. It's a local Wyndham business. They do have products available to everyone, but if you are a Wyndham resident, you can also get a subsidy on those products. If you're not a Wyndham resident, you'd have to check with your local council for any deals that they're offering. Unfortunately, you're not able to get Wyndham subsidies if you're not a Wyndham resident for obvious reasons, but you're still more than welcome to join us today and learn from the good people at Wormlovers. Just housekeeping, it looks like everyone is pretty much up to speed with it these days, but please make sure you're muted. Looks like everyone is. Just with the cameras on, we are recording the session, so please keep that in mind. If you have questions, put them into the chat box, and there's already a couple of comments there. Hungry Ben, good to hear from you, Jenny, and congratulations. Yep, excellent. So everyone's using the chat box already. Like I said, you're all well versed at this stuff, so we're all veterans these days. Put any questions you have for the ladies. They won't be able to stop to answer questions during the presentation. They'll go through their presentation, but at the end, they've allowed 10 to 15 minutes to try to get through all the questions that you have. So just put the questions in as we go. If they don't answer them during the presentation, then they'll be able to answer them after the presentation. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Gia and Gail. And yeah, thanks for coming along. Hope you enjoy the session.
Okay, cool. Can everyone hear me all right? Cool. So thank you so much, Simon, for the introduction. And for those who just come in, my name is Jie, and I'm one of the Wormlovers at Wormlovers. So today I'm going to talk to you about worms, of course, but also composting in general, because we really think there's nothing really called food waste. There's nothing in our food that should be wasted, should be going to the landfill. And just to start with, I want to talk about the concept of composting. So it's an overarching term for, harnessing the power of microorganisms that exist in the atmosphere around us and work with them to turn any organic material into compost, which is the gardeners will call it a garden gold. It's really rich in nutrients, but also helps the soil to improve greatly. Basically, technically, anything that once lived can be composted. But in our home composting context, we do need to be careful about certain things that we want to avoid for certain systems. And depending on your tolerance level of things, you can choose tolerance levels, but also your time and your effort you want to invest in. You can, and also the outputs you want to have. If you want a lot of good quality compost to start a spring garden like veggie patch, you probably need to do the larger scale composting, which needs more maintenance, like turning the compost heap to accelerate the activity of the microorganisms. Now let's move on to what to consider before you actually start composting. So whoever is here listening to this workshop, I believe you're somewhat already starting. I think let's start from the very basics. So why am I composting? The very first thing that comes to my mind is I feel guilty just throwing away my food waste, because I know they can be turned into something that is useful. And believe it or not, across Melbourne, a lot of councils have done this kind of waste audit, and they realized the household compost can have up to 40% that is just food. And what a waste if we let it go into landfill, and how the whole system to, collect it at a curbside and then deliver it to the landfill site, which is usually far away from the center of the city. And then all this methane gas it could produce while they're decomposing in the landfill. So when we are composting, we're essentially cutting down this all greenhouse emissions. So that is my thought, but also for a lot of home gardeners, I believe you would love the outputs from your composting systems, no matter if it's in the solid form, like actual compost itself, worm castings, or if it's liquid forms that are usually we can have from things like Bokashi beans and worm farms. That's another kind of output we can have. And also, I think it's a really, as soon as I started composting, I actually started worm farming in my tiny apartment. I feel like it's really an efficient way to manage my waste, because when I didn't have this worm farm, I just simply throw my banana peels in the bin, and it gets really full very fast, and have to keep throwing them away. Otherwise, they start to smell bad or attract vinegar flies. But as soon as I started, that little worm farm, the green one, is the one I brought from my home this morning. So that actually helps me to save a lot of work throwing out my rubbish that frequently. So these are the three reasons I can think about why you start composting. You might also have a lot more other good reasons, but now let's move on to what we can compost. So I've already mentioned a bit, is the kitchen waste, of course, is the main thing that in the home context that we are using as the main source for composting. So here, just a few examples of things we collect just daily. We just can have a kitchen caddy and sitting on our bench, and all our food waste can go inside. And just a little tip here before I forget, you can line a newspaper at the bottom so that it doesn't, so it absorbs excessive moisture so that it doesn't smell. And as soon as it is full, or even not full, you can put that in any kind of composting system you have. And here are some, can you see this? So this grinded eggshells, especially for worm farms, you do want to try to grind it up. I know some people do blend them so that they are more available for your worms to eat. Otherwise, they wouldn't really chew through it, and you will end up having large chunks of eggshells in the bottom when you harvest the castings. So kitchen waste is, of course, one of the main source of the compostable materials that we have at home. And the second is garden waste. So be careful of the garden waste, is because sometimes it can get, so if you get a lot of twigs, those woody material, it can slow down the composting process. So with anything that are hard and dry and that are, like eucalyptus leaves, you probably want to avoid because they can't really decompose. But you do want to get those twigs into very, fine particles, or, chop it up, or, try to, make it smaller so that it really accelerates the whole composting process. And then other things from our homes, like toilet paper rolls, kitchen rolls, as long as there isn't any, fatty, any oils or salt on it, can be also composted. And of course, cardboards are important. So now that we are mentioning the ingredients of our compost, we need to introduce this concept called browns and the greens. So you might have heard of it. Most of the nitrogen-rich stuff are greens, and that's our most of the wet, fresh kitchen scraps, and also maybe grass clippings, coffee grounds, and tea bags. So those are nitrogen-rich. Although I know coffee coffee beans, coffee grounds look brown, but they belong to the greens because they are rich in nitrogen. And on the other side, we need browns, which are carbon-rich stuff, which are usually, the twigs from the garden, fallen leaves when they're dry, and also cardboard, shredded paper, newspaper. They're all important for as a carbon source. We need to strike a balance. So usually by volume, we want half and half of both to make sure this balance is reached, so that our compost, so because it's essentially they're the diet of the microorganisms that helps breaking down them. So in order for the microorganisms to work and to work healthily, we need to strike this balance for their diet. The third thing you need to consider is location. So location. Do you have a small space only? Maybe you can't really do larger scale composting, but you still have the option to use indoor worm farms, or that one over there I have. It's, I don't know if you can see okay. That's a little Bokashi bean, which is really helpful for people who don't have a larger space. But if you have an option to compost outdoors, if you have a shady place, I definitely recommend going for Hungry Bean Worm Farm, because they are kind of having both the advantages of worm farms, but also compost bins. They can treat quite a lot of food waste every day, but also you don't need to do a lot of things yourself. Compared to compost, you probably need to do the turning all the time yourself. But in a worm farm, the worms would be, going through. So if you have a shady place, it doesn't have to be outside. It can be in a car park, can be in a, just a sheltered and shady place. That would be really make worm farms a good choice for you. And the third one, which I don't really have product here, but I can show you here. It's something really, really common. It's just the normal compost bins you have in the, you can see that in a lot of backyards here. Can you see this? Or maybe, they can come in different shapes and different designs. So these are the three different kind of things you need to consider before actually start composting. And now we are talking about another three things. It's the three different composting methods. For me, I really, really want to start with worm farming, because that's my favorite. And everyone who lives in Melbourne locally, I really recommend it, because our climate is quite good for worm farming. Even though we can get very hot days in the summertime, it cools down at night. And so before the bedding inside the worm farms heat up, they can already cool down. The only thing we need to be careful is maybe not the 40-degree days, but the 30-degree days. So if it's above 30 degrees and doesn't cool down below 25, and it goes on for 2-3 days, we need to do something. Oops. But there's still something we can do to help the worms survive those extreme weathers, which doesn't happen a lot. Hopefully not in the future either. Okay, maybe I'll now switch to this live video, and my colleague Gail will help me to show you, use the second camera to show the actual worm farms. Careful. So if you have any questions, by the way, you can type in the chat box and we will have 10 minutes or 15 minutes left in the end to answer all of those. Okay, where are you, Gail? I can. Yeah, it's you. And I will mute here. And, mute. Chat box.
Hang on, try now.
If you can hear me all right, and you can see the main screen showing the hungry bean worm farm, could you type just one in the chat box?
Well, we can see you, Jer, and we can see the hungry bin, but it's the same screen that it was before, the same camera, I should say.
Ah, so I'm not host, it seems.
You're not
How about
host?
now?
Hang on a second. Let me just get up.
If I still.
Unpin that
Now?
one. Oh, yep, that's it.
Great.
Okay, cool. So now we're looking at the hungry bee worm farm, and so these are the new type of worm farm. But this is a smaller worm farm. They have different stack layers. They actually are just a nicer looking version of the traditional ones we have. You can have founding foundings. They are just black in color, and they come in round or square. I believe Wyndham City Council subsidized the round one, the candle ones. And this is another product we have, just to show you, because it's a working one. And with worm farms that are in stack layers, usually the bottom layer here, the bottom tray here is for collecting the liquid. So any excessive liquid that comes from the our food will eventually drain to here. And usually the smaller worm farms have a tap in here, if you can see clearly. And at home, I just have this one here, and I can just turn the tap on if I need to collect my worm liquid to use. So this is just the worm juice tray. And then you have two trays above. And currently I have this tray, which is, I call it a resting tray. So it is resting. So it was the working, so this one is the working tray where most of my worms are. And this resting tray is where most the worms were. So they were in here, they were living in here. And I didn't have the top tray before. So they were living in here, munching through all the food scraps. And then when it reaches, like when it gets really full, I put in this layer. So if you can have a close look here. So in this layer, there are some worms left still, but most of the worms are actually coming, trying to come up, because that's where most of the food is. And usually it takes around 3 or 4 months to fill up each tray. And then it takes another 2 or 3 months for the worms to, keep coming up. You will still find some worms. So at the bottom of these 2 trays, there are holes, so the worms can, climb freely in between. And they can climb up to this tray when the food is kind of finished in here. But you can, then after a few months, all the food in here is already digested. So it's already turned into compost. And you can empty this tray. And by that time, this tray would be almost full. And you can put this tray on top of this tray, just kind of swap the position. And then the top tray will turn into the working tray, and the bottom tray will become the resting tray, and it will need to rest. But the benefit of worm farms doesn't matter if it's in stack layers or in this one, the hungry bee, it doesn't have this trays. You can feed at the same time you're harvesting. So with that one, you can harvest 1 tray of the castings every few months, and you can harvest the worm juice liquid every week up to several hundred mils. And the hungry bean, it has larger volume, it can host more worms, so that you can have more input and also more output. It really depends on how many worms you have and how healthy and active they are. That will depend the output. So usually, maybe we can talk about the hungry bean worm farm now. When you, so you can have a look inside. So it doesn't have the layers that one, but it has a large, it has a good kind of height, and you can feed from the top. It's just a mixture of different things. Remember the carbon and nitrogen ratio, so you can find papers with tiered up paper, but also some kitchen scraps and garden scraps from here. And then, oh, just to mention, it's really important if you're having a worm farms outside, get a blanket for it. It has several benefits. So firstly, it keeps the moisture within. So usually outside, especially in summertime, it can get really dry at the surface. So if you have the blanket on, it will avoid the moisture to escape from the whole system, so that the worms are happy. So even this one, you can see we have some paper, like especially cardboard, they tend to dry up. So if you have your worm farms, you know, if you have more paper in and don't want it to dry up, you need to make sure that it's moist. Either spray a little bit of water, or, you know, put a blanket on, or, you know, just do both. Usually you don't need to spray the water a lot, because there's already some moisture in your food waste, and it can get quite wet as they start to decompose, you know. But it's just a bit of you know, observation. So just see, oh, if the paper here is drying up. Another way to help you monitor is usually on the lid of this bin, you can have some, you can see some water vapors and condensed water, and even worms, you know, they can come up and to do a bit of exploration, especially during the night. So that tells you that they are actively working, and there's kind of good moisture. Just avoid anything that gets dry up on the surface. And then this worm farm doesn't have these layers, but it has a tapered shape, which means everything that will keep going down will be harvested on in this tray. This is the casting tray, this first tray, and you just need to, you know, remove this, and you get a whole tray of the nutritious castings, and you can put that straight onto your garden. And with the worm juice, it's a little bit tricky because it can come in different color. So usually it comes in this color. It's kind of like espresso or long black. So you just dilute it so that it's, usually we recommend 1 to 10, and that will become a light tea color, and you can use that onto your plants. So it's not, so both these products, they shouldn't have any smell. If they smell, that means it's not fully decomposed. You need to leave it for a while before you can use it on your plants. Otherwise, we recommend using them fresh, because that's the, when the microorganisms are the most active, you're actually, you know, promoting a living soil. And you might get lighter color liquid if you, say, pour water through the worm farms, or when you first start, you don't have a lot of nutrients accumulated here. It can not appear as dark as that, but once your worm farms are fully functioning, the worms are actively working, and you're, you know, having a more or less consistent input, you will have a more consistent output. Unless, you know, if you put it outside and then the liquid evaporates. That's another story. Another thing you need to not worry, but just be a little bit careful about the temperature inside. So we mentioned it's important to put it in a shady place, but especially in the summertime. But in the wintertime, it is actually okay to, if you don't have that option. So this would come in handy if you have a thermometer. You can kind of monitor, especially when it gets hot. With worm farms, in a shady place, it doesn't get that hot even in a really hot day. So the bedding inside, the temperature can vary. It's different from the ambient temperature. So even in a very cold day, if you put a lot of food and there's a lot of activities here, it can actually get quite hot. But on the other side, if you keep it moist and cool and in the sheltered area in the summertime, it might not reach that high. So this is good for monitoring the temperature of the bedding. So you just simply, put this in, and we can see the temperature here is around 27. So with worm farms, you don't want it to go over 30 or 32. That can get a bit dangerous. But otherwise, it's really not rocket science. Everyone can, with a bit of luck, can learn how to have worms as your pets, treat them as your pets. So as long as the worms are happy, we are happy, because they help us do a lot of things. We don't need to, talking about this, maybe we can talk a little bit about the normal compost bins. So essentially with the compost bins, it's just, we can put the benefit of them is we can put a lot of things inside, and we don't really need to, we can forget about it and it will further decompose. But if you do want your compost to be ready sooner, I know people who turn it every week or even more frequently, so that they are more, there's more activities. And with all these different kinds of composting systems, you need to chop up the food as much as possible, so that they are kind of, there's more surface area, so there's more reactions, and the microorganisms would be happier. If you use analogy, it's like kneading a dough. One thing is about carbon and the nitrogen balance, and another thing is about moisture. So you don't want it to be too wet or too dry. So with the larger compost bin, what usually happens is people forget about them in the garden, in the corner of the garden, and probably in the sunny spot, and they are in black, so they heat up, and they can, a lot of water can escape from it. So you can find it dries up, and especially when you put a lot of branches, woody material inside, it can dry up, and you don't turn it, so it's not mixed thoroughly, so there wouldn't be much activities, so they just dry out and stay there, and doesn't turn into compost. So this just like kneading the dough. So you put a little bit of water when you feel like it's drying up, and put more paper if you feel it's too wet. Now we can have a look at this little guy here. This is really if you don't have any other options, just living in a small apartment and not sure about worms because you might be afraid of them. Well, there's nothing to be afraid of them. But anyway, we have another option. This is called Bokashi Bean. And Bokashi Beans work in similar fashion, but there's a few things you need to be careful. The first thing is this one doesn't need a lot of aeration like the other ones. So with worm farms, see, we do have this little hand cultivator because we encourage you to mix up your food. So do a bit of mixing before you actually, after you put your food in. Don't just put a pile of wet food and then put a pile of newspaper on top. That's not gonna work. So you need to cut them small and mix thoroughly so that it's aerated. Same with the compost bin. You can get this compost aerators that are kind of like bottle screws. So you can screw that in and lift it up so that it's loosened, so it's aerated. Or you can just simply, if you're tough, you can use the garden fork to do a bit of stuff. But with this one, you don't need to do that. Actually, there's another little something. What do you call this, Gal?
Yes, that's a good question. A little paddle.
Yeah, a little paddle that helps you try to kind of press it down when you put food in, because you don't want much air in this system. So this is not, it's both a little bit aerobic, but mainly anaerobic. So the reason why I say this is we use a different kind of, a different group of microorganisms. So you can get this, we call it compost accelerator, or you can get them in sawdust kind of forms. So they are inoculated with effective microorganisms, and they don't naturally occur in our atmosphere. They're specialized group of microorganisms that helps break down. So with the other two composting systems, we try to avoid any meat or bones, but we know there's a lot of phosphorus, like nutrients in the bones we want to harness. So they can actually go into this one. It can be treated here. The only thing about this is, so when you start using this, you need to, there's a little mesh at the bottom, but you can also put a layer of newspaper and to stop any particles to go down, because that's where, see this tap here? So the tap will, yeah, so you can see the tap outside. That's the place to harvest the liquid fertilizer. And then you start to put your kitchen scraps in. Try to cut them into smaller sizes. Compared to worm farms or composting, this one do need to have smaller sizes, ideally under 2 centimeters in diameter. And then you can put one layer of your food and spray some of this on top, or sprinkle some of the sawdust like powder on top, and then you put another layer. Usually these layers are don't put more than 3 centimeters. So that's why I say that is really for just smaller households or just one person households. Another thing about this one is while you get this liquid, you need to dilute it by at least 100 times with water, because it can be quite strong and acidic, and probably your azaleas or your blueberries will like it, but some plants, they're really sensitive about acidity, so be careful about using this liquid. So dilute it further, at least 1 to 100, and then as this one fills up, it will need to, once you fill it up to the top, it will be resting for a couple of weeks. And during that time, you're still harvesting the liquid from the bottom, but then you will, the liquid will be more or less drained, and you get these semi-decomposed things inside, which you need to further compost in an outside compost bin, or you can also bury it in the ground. So just dig a big hole and put these things inside. So after a couple of weeks, that will further break down and you can just start growing things inside. So I think I've gone through.
Yeah, we've got a few questions coming in, so maybe we'll switch back.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Let's see. Do you want to make me host that?
yeah. And that will.
Did you guys want me to read the questions, or have you got it under control?
I can turn on this one. You can mute. Yeah.
You've got it? You've got it?
Yeah, I'm just looking through.
So you can start with Holly. My worm farm is quite small.
Yeah. How can I increase its productivity? Add more trays and worms? Yeah, you can definitely add more trays because usually with worm farms, it's like essentially the worm population and how active they are that determines how much food they can treat. So with smaller worm farms like that, or the standard, the black kennel worm farms, they can treat up to a few 100 grams per day. If you just have one working tray, because the space kind of limit the worms' activity. Their population will self-regulate depending on the environment, but also the space they have. So with the smaller worm farms, we find that we usually sell them with 1,000 worms, and they will breed up to a few thousand. And that means even they reach to top capacity, it's just only, well, my math. So each worm will eat around half of their body weight, and each worm weighs 0.3 grams. But yeah, forget about that math. So in general terms, these small worm farms, they can treat around like 300 grams at maximum capacity every day. So if you have more trays, more layers, you probably have 2 working trays. That means you can put more food. But I really doubt the convenience of it, because if you have 2 multiple working trays, it's a little bit hard because you feed on the top. So you lift this lid and put your food here, but then you need to, if this is another working tray, you do need to lift this one and put your food inside, which is not that convenient. So that's why we recommend start from, larger compost bins or worm farms that can host a lot more worms. So hungry beans can hold up to 10,000 worms, and that means they can treat up to 2 kilograms of food waste every day, and without causing any problems. I hope that answers the question. Cool. Yeah. It's just a little screen that I need.
Just with the next one, yeah, Deepak asked about the subsidies the council provides, and Jenny very generously put the website there. I was just going to add, so if you go to the website, you can then click on the products, and it's got the information there. So there's 6 different products that council subsidises. There's the hungry bin, there's the can of worms, which is the smaller round worm farm, the compost bin, the Bokashi bin, and then there's a couple of worm packages that you can get to add to that. So the subsidy is the hungry bin plus 2,000 worms goes from $3.99 down to $295.50, and that's including delivery. And then most of them, the smaller ones, they're all 50% off. So quite generous discounts. If you're interested and you're a Wyndham resident, I certainly encourage you to have a look there and
I wish I lived in Wyndham. It's really generous discount. So I know a lot of councils do subsidize, but a lot of them don't subsidize, especially hungry beans. And even if they do, it's not this much discount. So lucky you if you live within the area.
So Fatima's asked, how often can we use the worm juice and water for the plants?
Oh, that's a good plan. That's a good question. So with worm juice, it's kind of quite weak. So I use that on my plants, both to water on the roots, but I also put it in a spray bottle, diluted. I use it as a foliage fertilizer. So you can use it every week. You don't need to worry too much about anything because they are they have a lot of plant available nutrients that are soluble inside, and they are um, taken up very fast by the plants. They're not going to burn your plants like chicken manures or anything that are really strong. Yeah, so the worm farm outputs are just very mild, and with the castings, again, it's very kind of like act as a slow release fertilizer. You just incorporate in your topsoil. Every few months you can do that. I do that whenever my worm farm is full. I just put all of that onto my balcony garden and also my indoor plants. They're very versatile. You don't need to worry about even for native plants, they can help with it's not only about nutrients, but more about the whole microorganisms helping your soil to be alive. It's a lot of soil biology is in there, and also it really helps with the soil structure. So it helps your soil to like with water retention. If you have a really sandy soil, that will help the structure to improve. And on the other extreme, if you have clay soil, it will help to it's not going to break down the clay, but it do help to help your plants better breathe. It will make it slowly getting more friable. You'll get this black color rich soil. So yeah, the answer is yeah, every week you can do that as you harvest them. Just use.
Thank you. Holly asks, how do you aerate the smaller worm farms, the can of worms and the green one you've got there?
So the first trick is when you're collecting your food waste, you already have the balance of that mixture. So put some kitchen towels, put some shredded paper in your. I can show you. So you can have a caddy, or you can even have this is just a normal box like me, and I lined some newspaper at the bottom, and then inside there's a mixture of food scraps, but also kitchen towels that will help to already do some aeration. And for the smaller worm farms, I generally don't need to do a lot of aeration as long as I get the balance right here. So it's not too moist, not too dry.
Excellent. Holly also asked, how small do you need to cut the food for worm farms and compost bins?
The smaller the better. So I would recommend at least 3 centimeters or in diameter or below. I sometimes get lazy, so yeah, it depends on your style. I have friends who really do some how do you call it, worm smoothie. So they blend everything in here so that their worms get onto them. It's really about helping your worms access their food. If they're chunky and if they're exposed on the top and maybe drying up, the worms wouldn't come up to eat their food.
Yeah. I do have a confession to make, Gia. When I encourage people to start composting, I do tell them, you don't need to worry about any of that stuff. Just chuck it in the compost bin, it will be fine. But I think people here today are probably ready for the next step. So
exactly, I believe so. I know so many people, would do so many things for their worms, but they don't necessarily do. So Richard, my colleague at Wormlovers, he would always say, I just adopt this benign neglect approach. So you just chuck everything in. And actually, if you know your worms, if you know they're active, they're going to eat a lot of food. You don't need to, worry too much. It's just for beginners, some people who just started, and at the same time, we don't want to make people too worried about it's not rocket science, but also we want you to, do it in a way that's, what's happening and what's the science behind it.
Excellent, thank you. Deepak asks, what kitchen scraps are not supposed to be added to worm farm and compost bins? And what about leftover food?
That's a great question. So for compost bins, usually you need to avoid things like some things with oil, especially if your leftover food is cooked with a lot of grease, then try to avoid it and also try to avoid meat because they smells good and it might attract vermin. You want to avoid those things because of these reasons. And in the worm farms, you do need, their diet is a little bit more restricted. So just generally follow a Buddhist diet. So they're vegan. Try to focus just on fresh kitchen scraps from your chopping board, and no meat or dairy, and no spicy stuff like garlic or onion. So a lot of Buddhism don't eat that. So, and then citrus. Well, many people say no citrus. I feel if you chop it up further, they can take up, and don't put a lot at a time. The reason isn't because it's acidic or anything, because they kind of have these antimicrobial kind of traits that will slow down the activities of microorganisms. They will resist to break down, so you will find them still being there for a while. So if you don't have a lot, so don't let it make up more than 10% of the whole diet you're feeding to the worms. I think that should be fine. And same with coffee grounds. Coffee grounds are good, but you shouldn't go up to more than 10% because especially in summertime, it can heat up the whole system and make it acidic as well. But you're really welcome to give them a handful every week. They really love it.
Thank you for that. We got some free dietary advice as well. So just thrown in there nicely. Next one from Holly. My worm farm is not going through that much food waste. Started a month ago with 1,000 worms, only eating about 200 grams a week of food.
Yeah, thank you, Holly. I think we did mention about the size of the worm farms. That will determine the population and the activities of your worms. And you also need to check if your worms are all in. So I don't know, you might have the small stack layer ones. So maybe some of them haven't migrated to the top layer. You probably need to handpick them or, try to help them access their food.
Okay, we've got Jenny. At what rate do worms multiply?
That's another good question. That's a myth. So a lot of science. So we also always say under ideal environment, they can multiply every 21 days. But in our actual environment, they don't really reproduce as at the rate that we know. We don't want to talk about exact numbers. So the best thing you can tell is how much food they're going through every day. So if you really want to do the math, each worm eats half of their body weight every day. So if you get 1,000 worms, say, then they should be able to, and each worm is 0.3 grams. So if they eat half of their body weight, oh my God, that's 150 grams a day under ideal environments. But meanwhile, you might not have that ideal environment. Say your food isn't accessible because they're dry, because they're on top, they're exposed to light. Worms don't like the light, they're not climbing up. Or if they are, I don't know, if if it's hot or like if it's too hot or too cold, the worms can slow down a little bit as well. So worm farms are the homes of worms. They're not machines. We can't give an exact number to that. So they do multiply, but they also self-regulate their population. They don't keep multiplying. You won't have too many worms. You know, they will try to, you know, adjust to your feeding pattern.
So it won't help to play some romantic music for them, G, get them, you know, speed dating or something?
Well, I think they just find the right size of the partner.
That's all right. You don't have to answer that question. What are we up to next? How much is the subsidy? All right. So I'll just explain that one again. Most of the products, the subsidies are 50% that council subsidises the worm farm products, Wormlovers products for residents. So yeah, mostly 50%. It's just the hungry bins. They're not quite 50%. It's more like, I think, sort of 25%, just because they are a bit more expensive products. So we try to share the subsidies as fairly as we can. So hopefully that answers your question. But if you go to the Wormlovers website, www.wyndham.com.au /shop, or I think products is another option. Go to the website and you'll see it all there. You can just Google Wyndham Wormlovers. So the next question is, yes, thank you, Deepak. So do I need to get more worms? This is from Holly again. Yes, small stack layer, all living in top layer. Does she need to get more worms? Right.
It's really hard to tell without having a look at the actual condition inside. How big is the worm farm?
It's a small stacker one, so I imagine it's a can of worms.
And it's not going through even just your own food waste? Right. Yeah, probably try to get more worms, but also try to cut small all your food scraps and get a worm blanket. I find it really helps. Yeah.
Or yeah, I guess if she's a 3-layer stack like yours, no, it's very slow.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, Holly, I think 2 months, maybe the worm population is still building up. So just be patient. At first, my worm farm didn't go through that much either. So you really need to wait until half a year to see a more stabilized result. And maybe in the first few months, you don't get worm juice in like, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Deepak's asked, will the recording of this session be available on the website for future reference? Caroline, I don't know if you're able to jump in here. We are recording it. It's a little bit different to the other gardening sessions that we're doing. So I'm not entirely sure how the back end's going to work, but we will try to get the recording up for you guys to be able to look at again.
Yeah, and we do have on our website a lot more information about the FAQs. If you have a worm farm and you know, want to know more information, welcome to jump in. Gail, could you type that page? Yeah, thank you. We'll type that into the chat for your future reference. That's the whole page of all detailed information you can think about, even the types of small other critters you can find in worm farms, which are not necessarily harmful. They are all part of they're neighbors of the worms.
Excellent, thanks, G. So yeah, the My Smart Garden workshops, we're intending for them all to go up on the website, but this one might just be a bit tricky because the way we've done it in the back end, but we'll certainly try to get it up there for you. So Gail, thank you. You've got the website up there for, that's the General Wormlovers website, which is different to the Wyndham Council one, just to confuse matters. But yeah, that's got lots of answers for you about you know, the things that Wormlovers are using in their products. So anything else from you guys, or are you done for today, G?
We're good.
All good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for hosting us today and running your workshop. I hope everyone's really enjoyed the session. Like I said, please check out the other My Smart Garden workshops that we've got on. And yeah, by all means, if you've got any other questions or anything, feel free to get back to us. You can contact my team on email via wastewise@wyndham.vic.gov.au, and we're happy to pass on any questions or any advice that you're looking for. So yeah, once again, thanks for attending, and you know, hopefully we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you, everyone. See ya.
Bye, folks.
I think we have to end it.
Okay, we ended from